Today we will be discussing with a gentleman by the name Mr. Richard Reoch, who has been an international campaigner for peace for many years, and born in Canada. He is long been settled in the UK and has long experience of working with Amnesty International, and at one point of time he was the media head of the international rights organization Amnesty International, and besides he is also involved with a movement called Shambhala. It's a global movement based on Buddha's teaching, and he held the position of its head position, the presidency of that organization for many years. And recently, just 3-4 days back actually, he came to visit Bangladesh as part of a international interfaith peace corps delegation, 16-member delegation. He is one of them, who visited the camps in Cox's Bazar to have a first-hand experience of the Rohingya miseries, their life, and the huge influx of Rohingya community people who were forced out of Myanmar and took refuge in Bangladesh. Now we know that Rohingya population in Bangladesh is over 1 million now. So all this sort of experience and his current visit to Bangladesh, we'll talk to him. So welcome, Mr. Richard Reoch.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, I'd like to know from you that you are part of a delegation that came with a mission to see and have a first-hand experience of how the life of Rohingyas going on in the camps in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar district, and they were in the receiving end of many tortures, and they were forced out from their land, which they have long been residing there, but for whatever reasons, one reason or the other, there are different versions, of course. From Myanmar they were forced out, and Bangladesh, as you know, that from all humanitarian grounds gave them the shelter. So you have been there and you visited those places for 2 days, I think.
Yes.
On the 26th and 27th of this month.
That's correct.
So what was your experience there?
It was profoundly troubling. A doctor said that she had worked in war zones and refugee camps all around the world in her life and had never seen anything like this.
Okay.
It's not just the scale of the problem, it's the horrific way in which these people were treated. And this was particularly important for me as a Buddhist, because this atrocity is being carried out, and it's still continuing, by people who say that they are doing this in the name of Buddhism. So a very important moment for me was to be able to look these people in the eye and say to them how deeply, deeply saddened I am, and Buddhists around the world are, that it should be apparently in the name of Buddhism that this has been inflicted upon them.
And in the name of Buddhism, it does not actually, Buddha preached for peace and love for everyone, right?
Yes.
So it directly goes against his teaching.
I'm not a convert to Buddhism. I was born as a Buddhist. I have lived in the Buddhist tradition all my life.
Right.
I have never come across anything in the Buddhist teachings that is anywhere close to a justification for this. And the Buddha himself was no stranger to genocide. His own family, his own clan were the victims of genocide, and one of the last acts of his life was to refuse to give his blessing to an act of genocide by a neighboring kingdom.
So the very example is there in his lifetime of genocide taking place, and his position and his teaching. So, as we understand that you are a part of a delegation that actually included people, leaders, community leaders, religious leaders, and those who belong to many of the religions. I mean, Christianity, Islam, Jews.
Yes.
There are some Jewish leaders are also there, and Buddhists like you.
Yes.
Do you think that this in itself will actually spread a message of peace and actually this interfaith relationship? It will go to the world as a message that look, that people belonging to all religion actually not liking this sort of atrocities to a community.
Yes. Well, first of all, we are facing a gigantic problem in the world. And one visit by one delegation is not going to solve it. But it's part of a global effort to start demonstrating that actually the only way forward for humanity is coexistence. You know, after all, the greatest international statesman that Myanmar has produced, U Thant, the third Secretary General of the United Nations, had a tremendous spiritual impact, and he said the only war that humanity should be fighting is the war to promote diversity. And so the composition of this delegation was deliberate to show we may have different belief systems, but our common humanity is what binds us together here.
Exactly.
And we're determined through that to show that we're not taking one side or the other in terms of religious faith. We're standing on the side of humanity.
So, if there is anything that you are taking back from this visit to the world to say, or for the world to actually spread a message, what will be that?
Well, from our part of the delegation as Buddhists, we have two very clear messages. The first is we have launched an international appeal, which we are opening to be signed by Buddhists around the world, because it's very, very important.
This appeal to whom?
Well, this appeal is in fact going to the Buddhist leadership, the monastic leadership in Myanmar. Asking them to take a stand in the name of Buddhism against ethnic cleansing, against this killing, and against what many people see as genocide. Number one. And number two, there is a desperate need for international funding, because the international media spotlight has moved on. Bangladesh cannot possibly sustain this situation all on its own, and it needs the international community, both governments and people, to continue to be generous in meeting the most basic needs for these people. These people came here with nothing. And even if you look at their shelters, which are so fragile, bamboo and plastic, the monsoons are coming. One powerful, thunderclap could flatten all those dwellings and turn this into a swamp of mud. So we are definitely pledged to go back and encourage generosity from the world Buddhist community.
And do you foresee any donor fatigue or something like that, as this crisis is going on for past several months, and no short-term solution still in sight, so it will require a huge amount of actually assistance?
This is definitely correct, and I know the government of Bangladesh has already signaled a fear that although they were told money will be no problem, that, you know, once that spotlight of attention moves on, people go, oh, well, now we have to pay attention to the next crisis. And we have got to find a way to overcome this kind of short attention span of the international community.
Right.
And one thing that we like to think is that, in a way, the Buddhists are trained.
The very composition of the delegation, as you say, rightly, that it has a lot of diversity, religion-wise and also nationality-wise.
Yes.
I mean, you came from UK, Canadian citizen now settled in UK. There were people from US as well.
And Sudan.
And Sudan, country like Sudan also represented in this delegation. So, going back to those countries, I mean, do you think that you can have some sort of influence, lobbying, whatever, in a very positive sense on the government's administration, Congress people, people's representative,
right.
so that they take up this issue more seriously and actually put a pressure on the Myanmar so that for an early sort of solution to this problem?
Well, I think first of all, one of the reasons there were a number of people from the United States here is that the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate are currently debating legislation which would ensure continuing financial support for the humanitarian effort, but also to begin holding those who are responsible for these atrocities accountable under international law. And this is one of the things that the refugees spoke to us about. They said there are really three things that are necessary for their return. One is safety, one is citizenship, and the third is justice.
Right.
So that's part of the focus there, and in order for that sort of process to work in that country, there has to be a groundswell of popular opinion, and so my colleagues who were there from the United States are doing that. Okay. And similarly, in many of the countries that we come from, the networks associated with the Muslim community, with the Buddhist community, and the Christian community are very strong, and have historically always supported humanitarian efforts. So we are going back and we are going to plug into those networks, because at the very least we have to keep the spotlight of international attention on this. We're sure that if these people are forgotten, the people who committed these atrocities will be very happy.
All right, you're very right. So, as we have seen in the past as well, that in the 70s, late 70s, and then again in 90s, I mean, there were on and off this sort of influx of Rohingya people inside Bangladesh in previous period as well, but not in this many numbers.
No.
But this time it's pretty big number. I mean, people say that there are hardly any Rohingyas remaining there on the other side of the border.
Yes.
So, but in the past, it was perceived that there was administration, the Myanmar military's role, and things like that. But this time around, there is some perception that the army apart, the military people apart in Myanmar, the Buddhist, a section of Buddhist leaderships, the monks, with the sort of nationalistic zeal or whatever, or religious zeal or whatever. So they are also actually against this Rohingya people, took a position. And if it is true, then why it is so? Do you have any idea?
Well, you know, we asked in one of our meetings with some of the refugees, I asked this very question.
Okay.
I said, you know, like, all the traditions in all the faith traditions in Myanmar are traditions of peace.
Right.
Muslims, Islam is a religion of peace. Christianity is a religion of peace. Buddhism is a religion of peace.
Exactly.
What happened? I asked this gentleman who was one of the imams in the camp.
Okay.
And I thought his answer was telling and honest. He said, actually, We have no idea what got into their minds. And I thought the truth of this was that there seems to be some kind of, you might even say, hysteria.
Okay.
The frenzy with which these villages were burnt, babies thrown into the flames, women treated in the most abominable way, and in such a compressed period of time. It's like one of these eruptions of madness. Mm-hmm. But I am very, very sad to say that this madness has been very deliberately fanned by men wearing the sacred robes of the Buddhist tradition. And the profound mistake here is that they somehow think that they are protecting Buddhism.
Okay.
In fact, this is how a faith is destroyed. Because when people see these things being done, which are the exact opposite of the teachings, people lose confidence, both in that faith and actually in religion altogether.
So somehow they are, in one way or the other, we can say at the least that misled by something.
That's the polite way of putting it.
Yeah.
This is. I mean, it is true that genocide begins in the human mind. It begins with a catastrophe of the mind. Hatred also. They begin invisibly.
Right.
And they begin with a seed, like a drop of poison. And then it begins to spread. So this is actually part of, I think, all the teachings that we share in common is you have to pay attention to your own mind and your own heart. Because if it starts to go in the wrong direction, catastrophe is the result.
Right. Mr. Richard, how do you think that the world leaderships, regional leaderships, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and UN, so every organization and countries can chip in here for a durable solution of this crisis?
Well, I think first of all, at the international level, I think there has been a tremendous response, you could say, on the operational level from bodies like the United Nations Refugee Agency,
right,
and the voluntary agencies around the world. I mean, this is where you see the real beating heart of humanity. Something like this happens, they come. And on another level, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and particularly the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, has been very outspoken.
Yes.
They have been doing all the right work, and I know that they have been very carefully collecting evidence about this, because there is a serious question of bringing those responsible to what is called universal jurisdiction, meaning it may not be possible to have justice within the Myanmar court system, but there can be an international court, and I think that's that. However, at the more high level of politics of the UN, which after all is only made up of its member states, I think there's a feeling that Myanmar has powerful support, and that support will protect it from international criticism, and that's very, very sad. And,
right,
and it's the opposite of the way the international order is meant to work. The other aspect concerns Myanmar itself. And I don't think I'm saying anything surprising when I say there has got to be a significant change in the country. It's not up to me to say how that should come about or what it should be, but at the very least, there has to be a change of heart. Because after all, if you look at the country as a whole, it has more than 100 ethnic groups. It is a living example of ethnic diversity and religious diversity.
Exactly.
And if it is actually to survive, it has to have a way of embracing that. This is a long-term project. But the urgency about this particular crisis is that this is a time bomb. This is a time bomb for Myanmar's own political process and its effort to reach harmony in the country. It's a time bomb for Southeast Asia. And those two factors alone mean it is also a time bomb for the world. You cannot treat an almost entire population like this and expect that it will simply go away and that there will not be consequences. And so I'm not able to predict the future, but I feel a tremendous sense of urgency here, and that's why we have to work so hard right now, because if we put our efforts in right now, we might just possibly be able to either shorten the fuse or defuse this time bomb.
Okay. So as a process starter, I mean, as a first step, don't you think that there should be a repatriation process?
Well, there can only be a repatriation process if the people who are going to be repatriated want to be repatriated. Otherwise, it's another forced migration.
Yeah, so I'm picking it up from there, that to make them agreeable to repatriate, it is very important to bring in the faith and trust that they have lost in the process, and also create an environment within Myanmar so that they are rest assured that once they get back to their places, then there will be no more trouble.
Yes, I mean, this is not the same as saying to people after a natural disaster like a flood or a cyclone, we'll rebuild your homes, and when home is dry and safe, you can go back. These are people who have fled for their lives. So in the camps, when we asked them about this, they were very, very clear. There has to be safety. Safety means security, and as you know, the government of Bangladesh has proposed the creation of safe zones under UN supervision, which the refugees have described as UN peacekeepers. Then there's the issue of citizenship. They are not prepared to go back to a situation where they're utterly vulnerable and not recognized as part of the country. And the third aspect is justice. This is a universal concern of people like this everywhere in the world. They want to see those who did this to their loved ones. I think it's 60% of the young people there have lost either their mother or their father or both.
Or both.
And they've witnessed the most atrocious acts.
Also some of their siblings.
Yes. You know, this is murder, and it's murder on a mass scale. And so they need to see that something has changed, and for them the evidence is that those responsible have been brought to justice. So those three things require significant changes.
That draws an end to our conversation, and it's a pleasure meeting you and having this discussion with you.
And thank
Mr.
you
Richard,
very much.
and thank you for giving us the time.
Thank you, and thank you to the people of Bangladesh for opening your border to these people.
Thank you very much.